Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will offer an update on the case of Barry and Suzanne Morphew. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Barry Lee Morphew was born in 1967. Suzanne Renee Morphew was born in 1971. Barry and Suzanne grew up in Indiana and met in high school. In 1994, the couple married. They went on to have two daughters, Macy and Mallory. In 2018, the family moved into a 3,200 square foot house at 19057 Puma Path in Maysville, Colorado. This is 11 miles west of Salida. Barry owned a landscaping business, and Suzanne worked for a nonprofit organization. Their daughter Macy lived in the family house with them. Mallory was away at college. In February 2019, Suzanne started communicating with a married man from Michigan named Jeff Libler, who she had originally met in high school. Not long after they reconnected, their conversations turned romantic. On at least 6 occasions, they traveled to various locations to meet, possibly for the purpose of engaging in sexual activity. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Sunday, May 10, 2020, Mother's Day, at about 5:56 p.m., the police were notified by a neighbor that 49-year-old Suzanne Morphew was missing. Here is what the police found during the course of their investigation. The Morphew family house was locked. There was no sign of forced entry. Suzanne's vehicle was in the garage, but her bicycle was missing. The police found Suzanne's bicycle undamaged on a hillside off a dirt road near Route 50, less than a mile from her house. One day earlier, on Saturday, May 9, Suzanne sent a selfie to her boyfriend Jeff at 2:03 p.m. At 2:11 p.m., she sent another message to him. This was the last time she would ever communicate with anyone using her phone. The police spoke to Barry. He claimed that he last saw his wife Suzanne on Sunday, May 10. His alarm was set for 4:30 a.m., and he left his house at 5 a.m. for a pre-planned work trip to Broomfield, Colorado, almost 3 hours away. He went there to prepare for a landscaping job. Suzanne was still asleep when he left. She was the only one in the house at this time because Macy was on a road trip in Utah. When Barry arrived in Broomfield, he checked into a hotel and then made his way to the job site. At 5 p.m., when he was still at the job site, he received a call from his neighbors telling him that his daughters were concerned because they could not reach Suzanne. He directed the neighbors to check on his house. When they could not find Suzanne there, he told them to call the police. Investigators spoke to one of Barry's employees, who told them that he and Barry were supposed to travel together to Broomfield, but Barry left without telling him. From various sources, like video surveillance, the police learned that Barry had spent less than a half hour at the job site. Instead, he drove around to various locations throwing away items in trash cans. When his neighbors called him at 5 p.m., he was not at the job site as he claimed. Rather, he was at the hotel. On May 14, 2020, Suzanne's bicycle helmet was found 30 feet from Highway 50. It was 1.5 miles west of her residence and 0.84 miles west of where her bicycle had been found 4 days earlier. Based on the evidence, investigators were confident that Barry murdered Suzanne right after her phone became inactive on Saturday, May 9, 2020. On May 4, 2021, almost a year after his wife's disappearance, Barry Morphew was arrested and charged with several offenses, including first-degree murder. Prosecutors made several mistakes while trying to build the case against Barry, including withholding exculpatory evidence and missing deadlines. Several of their expert witnesses were excluded by the judge. The state lost confidence in their ability to secure a conviction, especially in light of Suzanne's body being missing. On April 19, 2022, all the charges against Barry Morphew were dismissed without prejudice, which meant he could be charged again in the future. Barry filed a civil rights lawsuit against various law enforcement officials, seeking $15 million in damages. He accused them of unlawful detention, conspiracy, fabrication of evidence, malicious prosecution, reckless investigation, and failure to intervene. On September 22, 2023, officers were searching for a missing woman unrelated to the Morphew investigation in a desert area near Moffett, Colorado, 46 miles south of Maysville. During this search, they found the partial skeletal remains of Suzanne Morphew in a shallow grave near Highway 17. A bullet was found near her remains. The autopsy indicated that Suzanne was killed by undetermined means. The state had now solved one of their problems. There was no doubt that Suzanne had been murdered. 3 different drugs were found in Suzanne's bones: a synthetic opioid called butorphanol, a tranquilizer called azapirin, and a sedative called medetomidine. The combination of these 3 drugs is found in an injectable chemical immobilizer for wildlife called BAM. Barry told investigators he owned BAM and admitted that he disposed of this tranquilizer during his trip to Broomfield, Colorado. On June 20, 2025, Barry Morphew was indicted on a single count of first-degree murder. He was arrested in Cave Creek, Arizona. At the time I'm making this video, Barry is working his way through the criminal justice system. Now moving to my analysis. Barry Morphew has always maintained his innocence, and he has a few supporters, including his daughters. He filed a lawsuit against law enforcement, accusing them of wrongdoing. The state, of course, disagrees. They had a rough time getting their case together, but now they are confident in their ability to successfully prosecute Barry for the murder of his wife, Suzanne. This brings me to the question, was Barry guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. At the time of her death, Suzanne Morphew was having an affair. Barry implied that his marriage was perfect, and Suzanne had no plans to leave him. Yet 4 days before she disappeared, Suzanne sent a text message to Barry saying, quote, "I'm done. I could care less what you are up to, and have been for years. We just need to figure this out civilly," unquote. On May 8, 2020, 2 days before Suzanne was reported missing, she put a note in her phone indicating that on May 6, Barry accused her of having a boyfriend. Barry clearly knew about the affair, which gave him a motive to commit murder. Suzanne wrote text messages to friends indicating that she did not feel safe being alone with Barry. She also indicated that Barry was untrustworthy, oppressive, harmful, threatening, and at one point had taken her phone. There was no evidence of a struggle where Suzanne's bicycle was discovered, and the bicycle was undamaged. How could a stranger have abducted Suzanne without any type of struggle? Suzanne's sunglasses and hydration backpack were found in her vehicle, which makes it seem like she did not take a bicycle ride. On Saturday, May 9, 2020, Suzanne sent messages to her lover just after 2 p.m. Barry turned his cell phone off at 2:47 p.m., 4 minutes after he arrived home. Data from Barry's phone indicated he was running all around his house. He told the police he was chasing a chipmunk. Barry claimed he went to bed at around 8 p.m. on May 9. However, according to data from his truck, it was backed up toward the house at 9:25 p.m. The doors opened and closed several times until 9:52 p.m. At 10:17 p.m., Barry reactivated his phone. From 3:25 a.m. to 3:49 a.m., now on May 10, 2020, Barry's pickup truck doors were once again opened and closed several times. At 4:23 a.m., Suzanne's cell phone stopped automated data connections with the tower. Barry turned his phone off 9 minutes later at 4:32 a.m. Barry said his alarm clock woke him up on May 10 at 4:30 a.m., but his alarm was not set. He reactivated his phone at 5:37 a.m. By this point, he was already driving toward Broomfield. In his initial story to the police, Barry never mentioned turning west on Highway 50, but later he admitted that he did. He said he was following an elk down the highway. Suzanne's bicycle helmet was found near where Barry had been driving that morning. The trip to Broomfield was suspicious. Barry was not supposed to make this trip until the evening on Sunday, and he was supposed to take an employee with him. Barry left early in the morning without telling the employee. When Barry was in Broomfield, he was captured on video disposing of trash bags at several different locations. He only spent a half hour at the job site. It seems strange to leave so early and yet not spend that much time doing any type of preparation at the job site. When his neighbors called at 5 p.m., Barry was not at the job site like he said he was. Suzanne just happened to go missing during a time when nobody else was home other than Barry. Suzanne's remains were found directly south of where she lived, and yet Barry drove north. It seems convenient that his alibi involved him traveling in the exact opposite direction. When considering the entire timeline, it seems clear that Barry had plenty of time to murder his wife, dispose of her body, and destroy evidence. In the Morphew house, the police found a broken door, which was not broken when they moved in. In a photograph that was taken 3 days after his wife went missing, scratch marks were visible on Barry's arm. In Barry's dryer, investigators found a plastic needle cover for a tranquilizer dart. In Barry's gun safe, they found a dart gun and accessories used to inject tranquilizer into darts. Barry told the police that he used the darts to immobilize deer in order to remove their antlers. 3 drugs contained in the tranquilizer, BAM, were found in Suzanne's skeletal remains. This drug can only be obtained with a prescription. In March 2018, Barry obtained a prescription for BAM. No other private citizens or private businesses in the county where Barry lived or the surrounding counties obtained a prescription for this drug from 2017 to 2020. Now, 2 government agencies did purchase the drug, Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the National Park Service, but all the BAM they purchased was accounted for. Now moving to the exculpatory factors. There were no witnesses to Suzanne's murder, no video. In theory, Barry's pickup truck was used to dispose of Suzanne's body, but no blood was found on the inside or the outside. The police had used Barry's cell phone data to determine he was running around to various areas of his house on the day he allegedly killed Suzanne, but these movements could be explained by a phenomenon called static drift. It is possible that Barry's cell phone never actually moved. The tranquilizer gun found in Barry's residence was inoperable and had not been fired in quite some time. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Barry Morphew is guilty of murder? In my opinion, yes, he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I believe that Barry should have been arrested and convicted of this crime years ago, but the state ran into difficulties with the case. Perhaps now justice can finally be served. Now moving to my final thoughts. Over the years, I have covered many cases. Sometimes these cases are covered in just one video. That's actually what happens most of the time. So I'll look at a case, I'll create a video, and that's it. There won't be another video that comes along. This could be because the case is settled, like there's no new information, like if a person committed a crime and they were sentenced to life in prison and all their appeals have been rejected. Doesn't really seem like there's much hope of more information coming out. So that'll be a case that I just make one video and that's it. Now, sometimes cases aren't like that. They are ongoing or there's a lot of interest in them. So new information keeps being released about the case, even if it has been resolved. For example, I have multiple videos on Gabby Petito, a young woman who was murdered by her boyfriend on a cross-country van life trip. Karen Reed, a woman who was accused of backing into her boyfriend with her Lexus SUV. She was later acquitted. Erin Patterson, a woman in Australia accused of poisoning 3 people to death. Brian Koberger, a man who allegedly killed 4 college students in a notorious crime. Abigail Zwerner, a school teacher in Virginia who was shot by a 6-year-old student. The Rust movie shooting. This shooting involved the actor Alec Baldwin killing a cinematographer. Sherry Papini, a case where a woman created a hoax. She said she was kidnapped. She was eventually convicted, but then she changed her story, and now she said that she only lied about the identity of her attacker. It's kind of a bizarre case. I've covered that a few times. Lori Vallow, one of the most complex cases ever, where a woman and her new lover were heavily involved in like a religious delusion, and they killed several people. And of course, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the quasi-royals who have decided to give up life in the British royal family and pursue various bizarre business interests. In addition to all these cases, I've covered many other cases multiple times as well. This video on Barry Morphew is number 5. So I have created 4 videos before this video. In looking through the old videos, I can see how information that was released on the case affected my opinion. My original video on this case was released in May 2021. At this point, Barry had just been charged with first-degree murder for the first time. My theory in that particular video was that he was guilty. I didn't offer any commentary on whether I thought he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It was just, I believed he was probably guilty. In May 2023, the case against Barry had been dismissed over a year earlier, and Barry filed a lawsuit. I covered the details of this lawsuit. I concluded that Barry might have been anxious. Like in looking at the lawsuit, he seemed like he was facing anxiety. He was trying to explain everything that he did in the way that made him look the most innocent. And it just seemed desperate and needy. It was a very long lawsuit. I think it was 185 pages. So he was really making a massive effort to shut down every possible way that someone could think he was guilty. In that video, I believed he was probably guilty in reality, but I believed that the state needed to find Suzanne's body or make some other significant discovery. So the state was in a decent position, but not really good enough. They were close to being ready to prosecute, again, in my opinion. In the video I released in October 2023, I talked about how the body had just been discovered in September 2023. This, of course, was a major break in the case. At this point, I thought Barry was guilty in reality, but I was not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. So we see yet another situation where the state of Colorado had more work to do with this case. In the video I released in May 2024, that was the video before this video, the autopsy findings had just been reported in April. I believe that Barry was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but just barely. So this is the first time that I thought he was guilty by the legal standard, but I still felt as though the state really needed to clean up their case if they wanted to have a very good chance at a conviction. The state of Colorado had some trouble at that time with the DNA evidence. They had found DNA in the Range Rover that Suzanne drove and some other places, and there were 3 possible matches. Now later, in the indictment that just came out in June 2025, the state of Colorado indicated that further analysis determined the DNA was not identical to any of those 3 people. They distinguished between the way they used the term match and the term identical. They are 2 different things in kind of the way they set things up. So a match just kind of pointed them in a direction of somebody who may have identical DNA, but it didn't mean that the person's DNA was actually identical. With the resolution of that problem, they had cleaned up the situation that I was discussing in May 2024. So the DNA situation was now resolved, and they had a clear path to prosecute Barry Morphew. With this video, the one I'm making right now, number 5, in June 2025, I once again believe that Barry is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Not just barely, like in the last video, rather at this point, I believe the state has a solid case. Some people will maintain that there are not enough reasons to find guilt in the case of Barry Morphew. Well, I can think of more than a few. Those are my thoughts on the case of Barry and Suzanne Morphew. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.